Hi, folks. My name is Arco. I'm going to be presenting our work on behalf of my co-authors on intimate partner financial abuse. Just as a quick note, I'll be discussing detailed accounts of abuse and harm, so please take the time to take care of yourself, pause the video, or step away if you need to. To begin with, I would like to share an anonymized example as to how devastating technology-enabled financial abuse can be for those affected. So Alex successfully applies for a credit card from the bank, and Jordan, who has been in a relationship with Alex, notices that Alex has stored their credit card information on their laptop, and this laptop is shared between Alex and Jordan. Knowing Alex's credentials, Jordan then uses the credit card information to participate in many fraudulent purchases. Alex discovers this and then immediately reports this compromise to the credit card company, and the credit card company initially argues that Alex is not responsible for the charges. 2 weeks later, however, Alex is then judged otherwise by the credit card company and told that they are responsible for the charges as a result of Alex and Jordan living together in the same home. This is a representative example of the complex journey through professional financial services that survivors of intimate partner violence, also known as IPV, face in reaching out for help. IPV is generally seen as a pattern of abusive behavior and is often carried out through various physical, emotional, sexual, and financial means, often to control or assert power over a partner. More than 40% of women and 25% of men experience this in their lifetime. Now, prior work has demonstrated that technology is playing a growing role in enabling abuse in these contexts, and this is mainly because the types of security guarantees this technology provides is not geared towards protecting against abusive actions and makes incorrect assumptions about safety, for instance, with respect to the relationship between a target and attacker, or in this case, a survivor and an abuser. This means that it's a problem for a growing number of technical service providers, and particularly financial service providers as well. Recent work has explored accounts of financial abuse from survivors and how to help them, as well as how existing financial technologies currently do not protect survivors from these unique threats. Financial abuse in intimate partnerships or intimate partner financial abuse, which we coin as IPFA, involves abusive behavior that intends to control or assert power specifically over a partner's finances. And this can be carried out with a motivation for personal gain or with an actual intent to harm the partner's financial health. However, many of the existing literature looks at invaluable accounts that rely on survivors who are already reaching out for help with technology through other specialist services. And this is a small slice of survivors of the whole population of survivors dealing with financial abuse. As a result, we were curious to learn further about what is beyond this small slice. And we asked the question, what can we learn from survivors who approach digital financial services directly? We make several contributions to understanding how survivors are reaching out to service providers to report their concerns. First and foremost, we build the first expert-validated dataset of survivor-authored narratives describing IPFA in communications with financial service providers. And using this dataset, we identify new key attacks and products mentioned in these narratives in order to help inform the design of safer technologies. And then finally, using this data set, we also take a deeper look into the barriers survivors face in resolving the issues that come along with technology-enabled financial abuse. Our survivor-authored narratives come specifically from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or the CFPB, which was founded in 2011 through the Dodd-Frank Act. And the CFPB was founded particularly to collect, monitor, and resolve consumer complaints around financial products and services. So customers typically reach out to the CFPB after not receiving a satisfactory response to a direct complaint from a financial service provider. And a consumer may submit a complaint to the CFPB, upon which the agency then requires the financial service provider in question to work to provide a reasonable response to the consumer's problem. In the process of doing so, the complainants have the option to submit an optional unstructured text narrative, and our focus is really on these unstructured text narratives, and particularly whether there are discussions of abuse within these narratives. To analyze these narratives in more depth, we use a bespoke workflow relying on sentence transformers to build a dataset of complaints. We then performed a qualitative analysis of 513 complaints to identify the different products, attacks, and barriers of service faced by complainants struggling with abuse. The example I used in my introduction is an example of what a text narrative can look like in the CFPB dataset, but there begs this question that we grappled with during this about how to identify abuse-relevant complaints. In some cases, abuse is explicitly mentioned, such as in the top case, where a financial abuse is two keywords within the complaint. However, this is only common for a very small number of cases. It is much more common within the complaints within the CFPB dataset that abuse is more subtle. For instance, in this case, the complainant's intimate partner takes out an insurance claim under their name, but no explicit abuse-related keywords are mentioned. So that brings us to the question of how can we represent the similarity in abuse within complaints? And for this, we leverage sentence transformer models. These models provide an abstract metric in replacement of specific abuse-related keywords. And we use a similarity metric where the closer to 1 the similarity of two complaints are, the more similar these complaints will be. So given a known IPFA complaint and a random complaint, if they have a high degree of similarity, upon manual review, it's likely that that random complaint may also deal with IPFA. And this is the intuition we use to build our workflow. Our workflow relies on a reference set of complaints, R, that includes complaints we have vetted already as potential cases of IPFA. We then use the intuition described before to produce embeddings and then cluster these embeddings based on the similarity metric we've described. We then manually review complaints from the clusters that include the most examples of our reference set complaints. These are added to the reference set as newly confirmed examples of IPFA, and the process can be rinsed and repeated. After a desired number of iterations, the final reference set that comes out of this process is our final collected data set. And in our case, this tallied up to be 513 total complaints. We then performed a qualitative analysis on these 513 complaints to identify the different products, attacks, and barriers of service faced by complainants struggling with abuse. After cleaning the data set for duplicates, we then deductively coded for themes amongst 5 researchers and across 8 different areas of coding. This included things like the type of financial attack, the potential consequences of abuse, the methods of resolution a complainant attempted, and the barriers to resolution that a complainant faced. We then performed critical discourse analysis to identify common themes and outlines within these complaints. And one of the first questions that we were able to take a deeper dive into is which digital consumer-facing financial products and technology-enabled financial attacks are prominently represented here. Our findings from this were rich, and we came up with 3 major areas, but for the sake of this presentation, we'll focus on the top 2 here. One attack we found involved a reliance on a survivor's account for carrying out criminal activity. In this case, we observed that the survivor is compromised from accessing the account, and the abuser is able to leverage this account due to having compromised it, whether that be through knowing credentials or through other forms of compromise. Now, this abuser then uses this compromised account to carry out different forms of criminal and fraudulent activity. Because the account is listed under the survivor's name, the survivor is directly held responsible for the consequences of these attacks, whether that be in the form of repaying stolen funds or dealing with potential legal ramifications. This becomes a difficult scenario for the survivor, as the survivor is shown as the account owner and perpetrator of criminal activity from the financial service provider's perspective. We found that assets and debts tend to be another target of attacks, particularly through financial negligence. During instances of separation or divorce, the survivor and abuser may establish formal or informal financial obligations to fulfill any loan or debt repayments or any financial obligations. Over time, however, abusers may ignore or actively refuse to fulfill their end of the financial responsibility, for instance, by refusing to pay child support. Survivors face additional financial burdens as a result from high pressures to provide for their families or to fulfill insurmountable debts. This prevents the survivor from not only living a financially healthy lifestyle in the present, but also pursuing future opportunities to borrow or open lines of credit. We then pivoted to examine what barriers to services that survivors encounter when attempting to resolve technology-enabled financial abuse. One barrier we saw occur often was that complainants would often describe policies for financial products that overlook the dynamics of abuse. For instance, we see an instance of a complaint which involves situations where an ex-partner has stolen the complaint's phone to initiate a fraudulent transfer, but the bank judges all of these transfers to be authorized and not fraudulent. And this is mainly because the complainant has had legitimate transactions with them in the past. And this is particularly common in intimate relationships where the status of the relationship changes and therefore the authorization also changes. However, the policies do not account for this and therefore are misaligned with this fundamental notion. We also saw that complainants had difficulty in evidencing legitimate cases of abuse. For instance, in this example, the complainant's intimate partner continues to obtain credit under their name, and the complainant has repeatedly attempted to dispute the account, only to be told that it's insufficient and receiving some seemingly vague responses that the financial service provider needs proof to carry out the dispute. This traps the survivor in a vicious cycle of experiencing abuse, where seeking resolution requires the complainant to continually try and provide proof without any clarity on what that proof really looks like. Looking ahead, we're excited by the practical impact of our research. Unclear account ownership and authorization approaches can create unique vulnerabilities to survivors of IPFA attacks in digital financial systems. These are common complex challenges for any digital system, but can have particularly severe negative consequences if we get it wrong for survivors, and particularly in financial systems as well. So we see great potential in the growth of safety checkups. Safety checkups are initiated currently by users and help them with actions such as checking and resetting app permissions, configuring privacy settings, and monitoring device logins. Our findings suggest that digital financial workflows may benefit from similarly guided mechanisms being implemented within the applications of financial institutions. As we have highlighted, even when survivors had successfully collected evidence of suspected financial abuse, the reporting infrastructures introduced new barriers to sharing these information with financial institutions. We suggest that small design changes to online complaints or even innocuous forms could have an enormous impact on reducing the cognitive burden on survivors. This can be further encouraged by a natural language processing approach that may help the consumer identify what vital contextual information or digital documentation may be missing from their stories and help potentially avoid a delay in desired resolution. It could also help with researchers gathering further insight into the fine-grained information, such as the impact of abuse and their desired resolution. These things were regrettably notably absent from the majority of complaints within the CFPB dataset we collected. Looking ahead, we want to continually improve ground truth for the role of technology within IPFA, particularly in the context of financial service providers. And one way we could plan to do this is by augmenting this data set with more indicators. Some examples of what this could look like involves making connections to internal complaints data sets at financial institutions or sourcing other customer reporting narratives to connect with this. In addition, we want to leverage our identification of the key characteristics of IPFA complaints, particularly with respect to financial attacks on specific products as well as barriers to service, in order to create new opportunities for improving evidence gathering. And this is to help mitigate the burdens of financial abuse for all. And with that, that's all I have time for today. I'd like to thank my collaborators, Kevin Lee, Vineeth Ravi, Jessica Staddon, and Rosanna Bellini for all their hard work, and I'd like to thank you all for listening.